Thanks, Peter. So today I am going to get up on my hobby horse and on those last 4 points in particular, and it'd be a little bit of call to arms, and also a little bit of how do we address some of the challenges. So feel free to interrupt me anytime. I'm not going to try and do death by PowerPoint, although there is quite a few, but there's a few concepts and challenges that we face when looking at how we integrate geology in particular into the downstream, both value chain from a mining point of view, but also from a project life cycle point of view as well. The propaganda. So IMDEX has been growing over the last few years. I've been with IMDEX for 6 years now, and when I started out, there was about 400 people globally. We're now up to around 1,000. Our market cap, we're ASX listed, market cap is over $1 billion, so we're getting up there. We operate under IMDEX with a number of brands, AMC, Reflex, and Devico, and then we have some leading partners with Crux and Datarock, and we provide a number of products and services across drilling optimization and rock knowledge, and a bunch of software that you can see down in here. We are global. At the moment, personally, I bounce between Queensland, Western Australia, and Chile, but we do have operations in Europe, North America, and Africa. So we've got a presence just about everywhere. There's a big hole, not unsurprisingly, there. But that's about it. So, heterogeneity, variability. The first one I thought I'd start off with is blasting, because it's the first bit that the rock interacts with a process in the mining chain. And this is from a colleague or ex-colleague, Lockie Kennelly. This was from a project he worked on, that he undertook some blasting optimization work. And this was his eye-opening moment. He did this blast, the two blasts, or the blasts next to each other. These are the outcomes. Nice fine fragmentation there. Of course, rocky, blocky material, horrible digging. And his comment was, geez, and this is almost verbatim, I finally realised what you've been talking about for the last couple of years. I wish I knew about what the geology actually was. I wish I knew about its hardness, and I wish I knew about the structure. Is that what you've been talking about? Yes, Lockie. And so this is where he started realising how much geology can feed into drill and blast and match the energy levels from drill and blast with the rock to get the optimal outcome. Another example, this is from flotation. This is a grade recovery curve. So concentrate grade up here, this is what you get paid for, and recovery from the material down here, copper recovery. This was a single ore type. And when you look at it, it's not a single ore type. In fact, there's quite different revenue and operating costs in amongst this ore type. So then there's a whole question of what ore type is. There's a lot of variability. Why worry about it? Well, I'll pick on a comminution example. This is some plant data. You can see blend 1, blend 2. This is every second day. You can see the variability in here. This is 2,000 tonnes per hour down to 1,000. That's a huge difference in A, cost, and B, revenue. And it's fluctuating. It's not in control at all. So the poor old Mets have a hard time controlling this plant. And even though you can see a step change in the blend, internally there was still a lot of variability sitting in there. And this little graph down here is an attempt to have a look at what are the time frames of that variability going through. This plant's always been known out of control. And then you go, well, why? This is an example of, from the same deposit, of hard mill, SAG mill hardness down a single drill hole. So this is one of the few examples that we actually have some high resolution hardness sampling down a hole, and these are the standard ore types that the site was using. And you can look in here and you can see the variability inside these ore types, and you can also see how it varies spatially. So I'll just and again, the blue is, so this is in SAG mill terms A times B. The blue is soft, so the higher is soft, they operate in reverse, and the red is very hard. And then there's just a colour gradient there. So this is 650 tonnes per hour. Down here, this is 1,200 tonnes per hour sitting up there. So very different throughputs.
How did you establish the data for that down the hole? What was the methodology?
We sampled the core and put it through some small scale comminution tests at the same scale as the assays, which I'll come to in a minute. Another hobby horse is averages. I hate averages. This is an example of the floor of averages that gets bandied around quite a bit, but I like it, is that the state of the drunk at his average position is alive, but the average state of the drunk is dead. So as soon as he wanders into the lane, he gets clobbered. This is another example of comminution hardness down a hole. Average is 76, but you can see the variability in it. So if you look at averages, then yeah, sure, it looks all good. You're going to be reasonably happy up here, but the mill's going to be out of control, but you'll be doing throughput. Down here, you're going to be in a world of hurt, and your revenues are going to plummet, given that the throughput dictates how much metal comes out the back end on a monthly time-based perspective. And downstream, meaning the mill, or even blasting, the mill, the flotation, the leach, whatever it happens to be, rarely experiences the average. It sees all these fluctuations.
Is that a daily mill output?
No, that's just a drill hole.
So once again, how do you measure it?
Similar method. We did some small scale comminution tests to have a look at what the true variability was. Now, another example. This is copper grade down a drill hole. So you can see here it's 400 odd metres. It is a porphyry copper. You look at the variography and you'll see here in this particular case, it's got a fairly high nugget and the range is sitting up around 40, 50 metres. So I'm sure quite a few people know about variography in this room. So that would say what this range is that it tells you when the samples become uncorrelated. So if you want to know your samples, want to know what it looks like, then your sampling needs to be less than this. So this is the brain teaser. This is the mill hardness for this particular hole. And this is its downhole variography. So when we first did this and presented this, this was heresy. And it still is heresy to most people. Because the implication is if you want to know your hardness through the mill, which controls throughput, which has the same weighting as grade, particularly in a porphyry. And this is saying I have a range out here that is similar to my copper, and I actually have a shorter range in here, another structure in here, then I should be sampling my comminution hardness at a tighter sampling density than copper grade. And you tell that to the Mets. Tell it to most geos. And they just, it's heresy. So there's a question of how you do it, but we'll ignore that. But this is some of the heterogeneity we see inside these ore bodies. A lot of people talk about, oh, we're in a bulk mining scenario, we can just, you know, put it through the mill. Like I said before, the mill doesn't see that bulk. It operates on a fairly small timeframe basis. And in one operation, there was a notice, a memo from the mill manager on the geo's board, on the pin board, said, if the concentrate grade drops below 26% copper for more than 6 hours, then I need to know. I went, oh, fair enough. What's he going to do? Oh, nothing. He'll just come and kick the Mets, then the Mets will blame the geos, and then he'll kick us. Oh, fair enough. What can you do about it? Is 6 hours reasonable? Yes, that's what the mill operates on. And if you work backwards, if you want to know what your flotation response is going to be on a 6 hourly basis, then your sampling back at the face, and they had 3 faces operating at once, has to be pretty damn tight, way tighter than we ever do. So it was a bit of a fallacy. And these are the disconnects that we see inside the operations. So I ask everyone, what drives the variability? The rock at various scales, depending on what process you're looking at. Obviously, blasting is quite different scale to flotation. In some ways, should we go back to the future? This is fairly depressing because we go back in 1906 in the first volume of economic geology. And an economic geologist must also be, to some extent, an engineer. Can't ignore the commercial importance of the deposits. Probabilities. Then on the flip side, in the same volume, to the metallurgist and mining engineer, a complete grasp of economic geology and all its relations is necessary, requirement of practical success. Have we lost something? Knowledge. The geology curriculum these days has trouble just dealing with this bit, never mind that bit. And these guys, well, I'm not sure there's a mining engineer course left in Australia per se. I think it's all postgraduate, might be one. Never mind the metallurgy. So most geologists don't learn anything about this side at all, and vice versa. Unless they do. Some engineers tell me that at uni they did geology for engineers, which was about licking rocks and looking at sedimentary and sort of non-relevant type geology. So that's what we're fine to know that, but what happens when the rock and variability is either underestimated, B, not communicated well, and I think we're all guilty of that at various times, ignored, or simply not recognised. And my first picture is a lot of this all comes from sort of personal knowledge. This was something I was involved with. This fits more into the ignored part of this is where the geology was ignored. There was a large pit wall failure and we lost a lot of ounces, and there were fairly calamitous impacts on the organisation. So that was just after it happened, and that was from Google Earth a year or so ago. Still hasn't been resolved. This is another more recent famous one. Rubicon, which I read has sort of resurrected itself, called Phoenix, if I I'm not mistaken. But the interesting one was it will go down as one of Canadian mining's worst Canadian mining meltdown in years. And much of the high grade appears to be on different geological structures than the company previously thought. They just got it wrong. So there was a whole raft of reasons, but basically it was poor geology, a lot of exuberance, wanting to fast track, take advantage of the market, and we'll touch on that aspect as well. Another one close to home, this is one of Dave Lowry's famous ones that he likes, which is Snowy 2. You know, what went wrong? Well, you look at some of the findings and they're highly analogous to mining. Some people within SMEC were worried about the geology, wanted more drilling to understand the complex geology. There wasn't enough information available, and it was about weighing up the cost of more investigation work against the value of the additional data. We face this all the time. How much do you spend? When do you spend it? Where's the value? But at the end of the day, if you don't know enough about the geology and you don't recognise the risk, then it can come back to bite. So this is some work that we're involved with University of British Columbia on looking at the value of information and trying to understand how the value of information or how information can be valued in a mining context. So John Steen used to be here at UQ in the business school and worked closely with the Sustainable Mining Institute for quite a while. Then he went to UBC, and this work continues. So one of it is a third of the key causes of asset impairment was around ore body knowledge. And their conclusion was it's poor risk management due to the lack of understanding of that ore body knowledge, and the sizes of these losses provides a strong case for placing a high value on having the right information at the right time. And what UBC has got a big project on is looking at how do you actually quantify that? How do you manage the risk? How do you quantify? How do you put a value on getting the information, which I think we probably all agree we've struggled with at various times. IPA, which does a lot of project work, has a fairly dim view on mining projects, that they are worse than other industry sectors by quite a long way. When I did some earlier work back in the early 2012-13-ish, there were some reports out then that only 2.5% of mining projects meet expectations from a business outcome. That's pretty sad. And it's why the mining sector gets caned, or one of the reasons. Oops. And this is another commentary out of Mining News, that it's basically the reconciliation between estimates, which include resources and cost, operating cost, timeframes, etc., holds the sector back in being able to find, build and run mines. So ore body knowledge is a third of the issue. That's something we need to address. So the next bit is about who and how is the information about the rock obtained. So we have the platforms, and having a geophysics background, I don't discount using the air and using the ground, as well as the rigs themselves, the hole, and what comes out of the hole, either chips or core. So we've got what's that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different platforms that we can obtain data from. And then we've got many tools. This was my attempt at using ChatGPT and asked it to provide me a collage of all the tools that are used to characterize rock. in the minerals exploration industry. More realistic one, I gave up on ChatGPT. But we have things like, we have the core, a plug for index that we have our logger X for doing structural measurements. We have handheld XRFs, NIR. This is the Scanalyze XRF. We've got the hyperspectral core scanning. We've got computerized traditional logging, and then we've got paper traditionalized logging. You know, hand lenses, microscopes, MagSus meters. This is the portable XRD. And then another plug for index is, that's our blast dog that we use for logging blast holes. Sorry? Oh, damn it. Hey, it does know what it's talking about. I should have put that in. Or at least put it, as we were talking earlier, a can of VB. So this is just a few examples that I've been involved with over the years. This is the ground platform. This is electrical resistivity imaging that we use to help domain our deposit. It was shallow nickel laterite. You can see the holes here, and we were trying to understand what actually happened between the holes because there was quite a lot of short-term structure. This is an airborne EM that we're looking at the waste for sulfidic zones sitting inside the waste because it was so poorly drilled. No one knew what was in there, and there was high potential for acid rock drainage. So let's go and identify the zones and investigate those more closely. The televiewer here, and our friends at DataRock are doing a lot of work on computer vision with images from chips, hyperspectral, televiewer, all sorts of work that they're trying to process to have an objective outcome. This is some MWD drilling, or some MWD from the drill rigs at a site, showing the geology and hardness inside some of the benches. You know, it shows quite a lot of structure and a lot of detail sitting in there. That is currently not used. And that's what we're trying to change. And this one is from blast dog logging, porphyry copper, gamma down the bottom, magnetic susceptibility up the top. And you can see some of the variability that is sitting inside these patterns. You know, this isn't a particularly large area from a porphyry perspective. So we've got a lot of tools. One way to think about this is that the ore body knowledge is the foundation of value, that we collect the data down here, we turn that data into a model, and it might be a model of the geology, rock strength, the structure, mill hardness, whatever it needs to be down in here. We then apply engineering performance on top of that. So what does the mill look like? How are we going to blast it? So we model the outcomes or the performance from the engineering point of view. We have the long, medium, short-term planning that all leads into the financial model that ends up with the expected value. So the reason, if this is rubbery and this is a little uncertain, and the uncertainty is rarely passed up through this pyramid, particularly as you get up here, everything becomes quite deterministic, then obviously the outcome up here will have those uncertainties and be rubbery as well. But don't worry, we came up with an MPV. It's all good. A single MPV, I might add. A financial colleague and I got into great trouble when we did some real option valuation on a project we're working on and presented it upstairs and got told very quickly about, we just want a single MPV. We don't want to see ranges. We don't want to see options. Where is it? So one of the problems that we have with this is the project life cycle. I'm sure most people have seen this one. It's got the various flavors of a project life cycle up here, but we have the cost down here. So the cost is relatively low through here. When you go into construction, it's high, but management's attention tends to get focused in and around the end of feasibility studies, sort of that type of area. But the capacity to influence the outcome is diminishing by then. It's all up in here. It's all back here that you can change things. And once you're into tactical, then you're sort of locked in. You depending on the deposit, you have various room to wiggle.
You know, that's interesting. Just go back to that one. That's because geologists are involved in the strategic and engineers are involved in
This bit.
That's clearly on.
And there's the boundary. Yeah. Another good one is this is Lassonde curve from an investor point of view. And this would be interesting to get your guys' view from the junior end of the market, is that you hit this speculation, you're always trying to meet the market expectations, market demands. Do they actually value doing good ore body knowledge? And I've had some people, when I was involved with juniors, say, don't wreck the blue sky. Do it later. Not while we're in this phase, please. Don't do it. And then you get the discovery point and then what they call the orphan period, where you start realizing what it actually takes to get a project up and running. And, you know, the guys who came in here bail out here, and then you need another lot of investors coming in here, and however you finance the project. And it goes up and then it goes down. And this one's got a rough time frame on here. This can obviously vary depending where you are and what you're doing. But it also looks at the risk up here, and it pulls, sort of stops the technical risk in about here. I would argue that's only, the technical risk from grade and tonnes might be reasonable, but from all the other aspects, the modifying factors, then I would argue that keeps going. Some companies are doing it well, others less well. Many years ago, had a discussion with one company, and we were talking about when do you start doing ore body knowledge, how early on, and how detailed do you go? And their view was, for a porphyry type environment, the 6th hole. If you're still drilling on hole 6, 7, 8, well, you've got something of interest and you want to know about the economics of it, whether you should keep going. So that's when it starts. Not everyone follows that. This is another view of, from a geotechnical perspective, and this paper was actually called Putting Geology Back into Geotech, which I thought was quite amusing. But they had here the acquisition of geological information from 0 to 100, and they were pragmatic and realised there is a limit that isn't 100 around the practical data acquisition side, and there is a limit around the risk that you can't reduce uncertainty to 0. So there is that. They then had risk dropping down here, something like that, and cost coming up here. This curve here was what they called as a typical situation in early design for mining projects. This one here was the level of risk reduction on well-engineered construction projects, except Snowy 2. And they were saying the optimal expenditure is here, and they were pulling out this big gap in here for mining projects. Similarly, Mike Samus has this one about ore body knowledge learning curve. And in the early years, we have this knowledge gap. And this is what we need to address to try and understand how steep this curve should come up, and then where does it flatten, what is practical. And it is ore body by ore body dependent. If you've got a nice homogeneous, if one of those exists, deposit that doesn't vary, and then fine. You don't need as much data, but you have to show that. So from a user's perspective, this is a few comments. This is some work done by a master's student who was looking at ore body zonality for mine planning in the context of processing performance. And they made the comment, the geological database was not represented enough. Several mistakes were observed. Some data in the database was not informative. Hydrothermal alteration zonality could not be properly applied for the mine schedule due to the poor database. So basically, the geology wasn't that helpful. This is another one from, this one here is from Jun that I found on LinkedIn that I'd forgotten about. And his comment was, in relation to someone else's comment, that the only reliable data we can work with is the assay data historically. So I've concentrated on mainly using the assay data for my work. In more than half the cases where lithology is available, I've had to ignore the logs. They weren't reliable. And this bit's my own. In one project, we had 220 comminution tests, and only 38% of them had any sort of contextual information on litho and ore type, and they were pretty average. We were scraping the bottom of the barrel. In other cases, the geological logging is inconsistent, and we were looking at one project relatively recently and struggling. We're trying to link our geophysical logging from blast dog to the logging that the mine guys had done on the blast holes. Just couldn't make it work. Ended up looking at who had logged the holes, and strangely enough, it matched the geological domaining. And so it was domaining by geo, the person who logged it. The resource model, it's a resource model. It had a purpose. People tend to abuse models. And yeah, this is the one I was mentioning before about the domains had a strong correlation to the individuals who logged the holes. So even with assays, key elements that can be proxies for downstream mineralogy and process performance are poorly represented generally. There's a lot of people who have logged over many years. Downstream test work has a lot of issues, and the resource model is a simplistic representation of the deposit. It's a model at the end of the day that had a purpose. So what I want to show now is what's possible when geology and the associated variability provides a better understanding of what's happening downstream. A few examples of what good looks like. So, or how variability can come and bite you. This is from a blasting point of view. This is what the site had based their blast domains on. When you pull apart the resource development and look at the hardness, the lithos, the fracturing, everything that feeds into blastability, it looks like that. That's exactly the same level in this mine. So if you're applying the same process, thinking it's going to be the same, fixed process, and you're applying it to variable inputs, you're going to get variable outputs. And that's what Lockie saw in that original blast. This is some snapshots into where things can go. This one's from an AIG-GSAQ project. This is from a PhD student a few years ago, looking at core scanning and hyperspectral data. In this case, it's being able to relate the hyperspectral data and the texture around that data to SAG mill hardness, so you can start mapping out the variability. In this case, it's about the yield from a coal project, assuming a 15% ash. So again, you can start seeing the variability. You can start seeing how these things can be used, how you can start integrating it. This is a blast log example of material type classification from a porphyry copper. So these holes are about 6 meters apart, to give you an idea. There is a lot of variability in here, way more than people give any credit for a large porphyry. You can see not only vertical, but also horizontal. And this was all tied back to geology. It all made sense. We could explain what all of these are. We tailored it. It took quite a bit of work to try and sift through the good geology and the bad geology and really understand it. But we got there, and it shows what heterogeneity is heading into the plant and why they see some of the results that they did in the plant. This is another case from an operation where we had modelled, in this case it's throughput. We also did recovery, but this one's the throughput example. And this showed the cumulative distribution of the throughput on an annualised basis. This was not in their budget. Going forward, these low throughputs, this and this year, in the next 5 years were a shock to them. And it showed the risk of meeting their budget was quite low. And you could explain why it was going to be low. So they went back and re-optimised the pit to try and smooth that out. So they didn't have years where the throughput tanked, hence the gold tanked. Underground operation. In this particular case, it was looking at underbreak, overbreak. And it was looking at what the stope looked like and then what a buffer zone around the stope looked like. And what we did here was pulled apart the resource development drilling database for the whole of the site, and then we could start predicting where you were going to get over and under break just by looking at these. And it was looking at the difference between the in-stope and the buffer zone. So we had size distributions, joint sets and hardness. And you can see in this particular case that there was a large, what we call rubble, which was about fist size, natural fragmentation, sitting outside of this stope with lots of jointing, and that resulted in lots of overbreak. So that was the contrast between having something like that, competency inside the stope and then broken ground outside the stope. Similarly, this is another deposit from a flotation performance point of view that can be used in short and long term. This is all the floatability types, and this is the different flotation grade recovery curves for each of those types. In this particular case, it was each one of these grade recovery curves was in the block model, and then the mine went back and re-optimized stope sequencing again to try and level out some of the performance issues, so they didn't see big collapses in metal output. Another example of throughput, looking at mill size distribution on a stope by stope basis and trying to identify, again, this is from resource reserve drilling. It already exists. It was coupled with some mill modelling and a whole lot of other work, but the underlying part is the geology, is the geological data. And, identified these zones here and then could start looking at why and what you would do in the mill when they knew it was coming. Could you change the mill? If not, could you change the stope sequence? If not, sit back and just, the mill accepts it's going to be bad and don't chase its tail. Because a lot of what happens on the sites is the plant sees this variability and then starts chasing it and starts adapting and trying to change it. And that just makes the variability even worse. So if they know what's coming, they can sit back and go, well, I've got these levers to pull. If I pull those and I can't do any better, and this is what you're going to send me, hey, don't blame me. We just sit back and do the best we can, but it is what it is. This is some more recent data from a coal operation using BlastDog and integrating it with some of the MWD and getting a lot better view, of the coal surfaces. It's reasonably complex in some areas. It does actually look like that. There are dips into the pit of around 40 degrees of where this seam comes down into the pit. And you can see a lot of the structure and thrusts and repeats inside. This is a bench scale. So here's a quote from an ex-Barrick chief geo. Every drill hole has a purpose. Every drill hole should be thoroughly digested for data. Geology, geotech, environmental, geochem, hydrology, etc., etc. The holes cost a lot of money and need thorough analysis. I don't think we treat our holes with enough emphasis, particularly early on, to get the right information at the right time. So some of the challenges. Looking at the economics from an early stage of exploration. You know, you've got investors saying, just drill, get the tons and grade up, give me good news, get the news cycle going, get the share price moving, get people excited. I think we also have a lack in general of a really deep or good understanding of what ore body knowledge is, what are the parameters, how does it impact, how does it relate back to the geology? How does a SAG mill perform? And what is the geology that drives that? What's the grind size required? What are the minerals for flotation? What are the deleterious minerals? All of those sort of things. Some of the challenges we've got, as I showed before, we've got a lot of 5 or 6 sampling platforms and a myriad of tools out there for sampling. How do you choose the best one at the right time? And the other part that's missing is consistency throughout the project. How do we get the consistency? That's why everyone falls back on assays. And all of that at the relevant scale for what you're thinking about. Trying to get quality into our information. Again, bit of front-end loading of projects, maximising the value of drilling and geology right up front. Workflow changes. It's hard to change a workflow. This is my anchoring, and this came out of the Challenger disaster, the normalisation of deviancy. People know it's wrong, but because it's normal, then it's perceived to be low risk. But in actual fact, what they're doing is high risk, but that's just the way it is, so you accept it. We mentioned, and the other one is risk management, that the interdependencies between all these parts is pretty poorly understood across the industry. And you see that if you look at a lot of the financial valuations of projects where people will start flexing commodity prices, and they'll do, you know, the spider graphs and that shows the flex, but they don't go all the way back down to re-optimizing the pit shell based on that and the processing plant and everything else. Well, they do sometimes, but it's rare. And then feed it all the way back through up and have a look at what it really looks like when you change commodity prices. So that's all I had for tonight. What I'd like is some discussion, feedback, comments on addressing some of these challenges.
Thank you, John. Who's going to be game enough to put their hand up first? Mark.
Yeah. Where are they?
Thanks, John. Excellent presentation. You probably know that this is one of my hobby horses as well. I've published a number of papers on this subject. You mentioned early in your talk that a third of the problems are coming down to ore body knowledge. One of the papers that I've presented with Peter McCarthy, who's a well-known mining engineer, actually establishes that it's 2/3 of the problems are linked back to some form of ore body knowledge and lack of ore body knowledge. The other key thing, and I'm writing a paper on this at the present time, is I support everything you've said here. One of the things that I'm not seeing here is the issue of separating quality versus quantity of data. Not one resource report I have ever read has actually quantified the volume of direct measurements that have been collected for that ore body. And when you actually do the sums, drilling directly samples less than 0.0001% of the volume of the rock mass. So the geos do a fantastic estimate, a fantastic job of trying to interpret and analyze the ore body based on 0.0001% of the volume of direct measurements. When you start looking at geotech, metallurgy, and all of the other modifying factors, it's an order of magnitude even lower.
Oh, I'd go more.
Yeah.
I should have shown the example that I have of flotation in a pre-feas, which had 6 zeros, 0.000000 something percent of the ore body.
And when we are designing capital cost plants of $3, $4, $5 billion on the basis of 0.000001% of the so part of my area of interest is the quantity of data that we've actually collected and how low it actually is, as opposed to the quality of the analysis that we perform. And all of those things you've said are great. So I think it's just a fantastic topic.
So how do we fix that, Mark?
Well, oh, absolutely. Well, I'm sick and tired of pointing this out, but we have a fundamental discrepancy between data and the JORC code. We have so many deposits that are quantified as measured on the basis of so little data. And until we actually publicize and get everyone, investors. So in the JORC code report, you should actually say, we're just releasing our new resource estimate. By the way, the direct amount of measurements that we have on this estimate is 0.00001% of the volume. So please take that into account, even though we're going to be silly enough to call it measured. So there's a lot of things, John. And you and I can have a conversation
we could
forever about this after this.
Mark, any other questions? There must be.
All comments.
All comments.
Yeah, just discussion more than
Discussion.
Yeah, I suppose I've worked junior end and the major end. And there's that disconnect between the juniors just rushing through. And I'm a scientist, fundamentally PhD, just want to get the detail, but no, you got to get, because our funding and investors want to get, and you have to backtrack. And then now the majors don't start from the beginning anymore. They pick up a juniors project
That's
and
true,
try and reconstruct the bloody thing, and they're a mess again and again and again. So the powers that be, we're fighting all the time. I'm totally aware of what you're saying, but it's embedded in the money game so much.
So we have to change the money.
The culture.
But
yeah. So
There's a very good economic reason for that happening. Juniors don't have the money.
yeah, no, fair enough.
End of story.
But the majors like to pick up junior companies. Yeah.
That's because they know you're to explore
Exactly. So there's that disconnect.
But how much extra, and it's to do some extra quality work, if you take this comment at the bottom here to put into some of the, and it's a judgment call of when you start, but you've got something that looks interesting. When do you start putting the effort in, and when would investors start valuing that effort? Because that's what you need.
Well, I think some of it is just looking at data properly and looking at it. You know, there should be no silos from geologists doing extra holes. My first boss 40 years ago said the senior project geo should summary log every drill hole. And he'd be, well, he's still alive, but he'd be just shaking his head. You know, we store everything beautifully, but we don't verify it and analyze it enough to make sure it's quality. It goes back to Mark's comment about quality. And you can extract much more from plods and other things that we're just not doing.
So my challenge to everyone is, how do we change it? That would be a start. Yeah.
John,
Stop having a senior drill and blast engineer with 2.5 years experience who has never been in the pit. That was one story I heard a few weeks ago.
oh, completing.
Anecdotally, I can recall being in a meeting with a geotechnical engineer from a major coal company in Queensland who had sterilised, the company had sterilised $300 million worth of coal due to geotechnical problems with their longwall operation. That never got publicly reported because the company didn't have to publicly report that they had sterilised 300 million tonnes of coal. Until we get to the point where investors actually know what problems are being experienced, and the industry is absolutely world class at burying its mistakes.
An example of what you're saying, mentoring young geologists to log. But Scott Halley did a great talk the other day to say, look, 5 geologists, good geologists, logged this deposit. He did the incredible lithogeochemistry, iron gas, and sorted out the problem. It is a combination between great observation skills to look for variation and technology. The logging and the lithogeochemistry combination I'm finding very powerful to differentiate, because what you've got to do, and I've been this, is the engineer just wants 5-metre blocks. What's that? And amazingly, one day I actually had an engineer come to me one day and said, how hard is this rock? Can we go and test that and do that? Communication across those channels, across all the broad spectrum. It only comes with experience. I'm trying desperately to get this across to juniors that I'm working with. I was unaware of it 20 years ago.
No. Caleb, can I put you on the spot? You've done a lot of brownfields type work, which is often close to the mines. What's your view on the current practices?
I mean, opportunity there. Data capture, I mean, like the front end loading of drilling activities. I know IMDEX have got tools on sensors and rigs and stuff, but if you think about what's going into the drilling from the get-go, do we actually capture that data and utilize it to inform rock hardness, blasting, et cetera, et cetera? There's plenty of opportunities there.
Do we do it?
Do we capture the data regularly enough, utilize it to geologists, actually bring that into the database and measure it?
And use it to help other.
Data in is good, got to be used coming on the outside as well. No point in capturing if no one's using it.
John, does a lot of this stem from I'll have my greenfields exploration hat on. 99% of the holes we ever drill will go nowhere. Or company 27 will try to float it again in 20 years' time, but yeah, it's never going to be a mine. So knowing that most of what we do, particularly in really early stage exploration, isn't going to go anywhere, you always hope, but you kind of limit the amount of time you spend logging holes or collecting data, knowing that you're looking for indications of mineralization and therefore discovery. So you get into this habit, I think, that potentially you collect what you need for your purposes. And I know you mentioned this idea about you have to have the mine geologist or the mine engineer's hat on at the beginning to understand what's going on. But the reality is we're not going to do that. We've got very small budgets, limited time. It's 40 degrees, the flies are out there. It's horrible to be there. And 6 weeks out in the field, you've had enough. So
Yep.
is it more to do with culture?
I think, so my experience, I mean, I've logged core and I've gone back the next day and gone, what the hell was I thinking? Because it was hot in the afternoon, whatever it was. Yeah. It's also when you do it. So I agree with you that a lot of early greenfield scout test hypothesis drilling, you don't need to do all of this, but it's more when you start getting something that looks interesting and you're going to that next step of, do I commit funds for further drilling to try to do extensions, or when it looks promising, I guess, is when, my view is when you should really start taking note of it. But at the same time, like others have said, when you're a junior company, and I've been there, and the pressure's on to get results out and get good news out and get into that cycle.
How much can we know? And you showed that graph where someone was sensible enough to say, well, you can't get to 100%. And we've spoken about what we collect, and you know, we all work within our own experience. How much can we actually practically know about a deposit?
Anyone got any?
And you know, is 50% practically better than 55%? Or, sorry, the other way around.
Well, this is where it becomes the, I guess, the senior geologist, whoever it is, from their experience, their call, based on what they know about the mineralization style, the geology style, how it's going to potentially impact the plant, whatever potential plant there is. And where you are. Obviously, if you're in a scoping study, you need enough to be able to assess the options of that scoping study. Do you just make a bunch of blind assumptions? Like in one report, I saw that it was a 43-101 report I was reading, that they said, oh, we have no problems with arsenic in our concentrate. It's a beautifully clean concentrate, floats perfectly. And then you go and read the geology bit, and it talks about, oh, high-grade arsenic zones where structures intersect and stuff like this. And you go, okay, well, obviously they didn't sample that stuff. And that's probably deliberate, that you avoid that bit, because it's going to put some negative connotations out.
And ask a question, that one, you already know the answer to. Any other comments? Yes, Mr. Fellow?
Yeah, John, you had a slide up which showed copper variation down a drill hole and also hardness, and they didn't correlate very well at all from memory. And that copper was, you know, obviously showing where the mineralization was. How universal do you think it would be, you know, if you're throwing more elements at the problem, if you had silica and your major elements, to be able to use them as a proxy for hardness? I mean, it might work somewhere. How universal do you think that might be?
I think you would get reasonably close, but then how do you validate it? Would be my question. What do you validate it against?
Yeah, exactly. What might apply at one deposit,
Yeah.
unless you have all of those you know, small scale samplings which you send off on work index or.
And if you look
whatever.
at what Kathy Erig's done at Olympic Dam, I mean, she had the luxury of some really healthy budgets and super long mine life and could assay it for everything known to man and reassay it. And she did some fantastic work on what you can get out of that, because at the end of the day, actually, assays are proxies for the mineralogy. I think the bit that's missing with assays, particularly for hardness and things, is texture. So there's a textural element that you're missing.
Thank you. Any other comments, thoughts?
Okay, it's about iron ore. Iron ore 30 years ago was where I was involved a little bit, but we defined some things, all the varying material types. It was about mineralization, what sort of hematite, magnetite, whatever it was, or goethite, whatever it was, mixtures. And that was really important because it was really materials that are going to get processed. And part of the most important thing in iron ore is blending. And that doesn't happen enough in gold or copper, blending. And it's because they don't actually define the materials. You have to have the right sort of assays, but you need to actually understand the types of materials they are, all the textures, the fragment sizes, how it breaks down, what size, when it gets crushed or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of metallurgical work that needs to be done. In early days of doing consulting, there were people who only have a new deposit. They would do one metallurgical test on deep holes, down diamond holes about 200 or 300 meters. It was going to be an open pit. Made no sense at all about the metallurgical aspects of it. So one of the things I would always suggest is that when you're looking, you do the drilling, you do the assaying, but make sure you understand the metallurgy, the mineralogy, what all the other physical things are about the materials that you're looking at, and make sure that you start looking when you're doing exploration, thinking about what's going to happen when you're going to mine it. And so that, in those sorts of thoughts, it may impact on what you're actually going to do in the future.
So that's without doing anything, or doing limited scale stuff, but starting to see relationships and linking the geology with
you have to have that thought all the time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. Any other last thoughts? Oh, Simon.
Okay, just got an idea for some practicality in addressing some of this. Is maybe the universities actually teach core logging. No, I mean, actually it forms a substantial subunit of a course.
Yep.
So first of all, you get your variety of geology because you core log 5 or 6 deposits or something like that, and you collect all the information, and then you explain what that information is used for and how it's important. So there's just a simple practical. Well, I know QUT does one practical on core logging, but maybe it needs to be a bit more substantial.
Like you probably all do with it. Not just here. I was talking to the Chileans as well at University of Chile, and they're talking about similar things that they don't do anymore. Good point.
I think that's what the AIG runs, of course.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to Doug's comment, but to go back to the thinking about the junior end of the market. You know, juniors don't have money, Doug. I think one of the fundamental problems with our industry is we fund it. The funding model's broken, it's inefficient. We do it through a lot of juniors. They only have a short period of time to do things. So like was already said, we're out grasping for projects to drill, and really the reality of the matter is most of the time we're managing failure, not success. So, you know, what you tend to see is when you actually latch onto a project, there'll be a group of geologists or a geologist, and I've done this myself, where you do this 6 months or 3 month re-logging exercise. I think what you see is some of the best projects come out are the ones that have been logged 3 or 4 times by one group of people.
That consistency comes in.
Yeah.
By multiple people checking each other. Do you think the modern era can afford that sort of overhead these days?
No, it's difficult. It's difficult at the junior end. It's the next tier of mining or exploration company that is able to do this.
I think it's difficult for them these days too.
What's that?
I think it's difficult for those guys too.
Well, the way we fund our business is inefficient. And we rely on gamblers, basically, the investors, to fund our industry, and there's an enormous amount of money wasted. And so that's what the juniors, I don't think the juniors are to blame. They're out there doing their thing and they might hook onto something successfully. And that's when someone else needs to come and step in and take over. And it happens.
And it's not a new problem, this either. I mean, it's been around for years. It's just how do we chip away at it? And it hasn't helped with the university funding system recently and the decline in mining engineering and geology and all the other bits.